La emisión está comenzando. Todos los asistentes están en modo de solo escucha.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to greet you and to welcome you on behalf of the NBSAP Forum to this fourth webinar of the Introduction to Resilience for Development MOOC, offered by the United Nations Development Programme, which concludes Part 1, Understanding Resilience Thinking. My name is Marcela Torres, and I'm a consultant on sustainable development and green economy. I will be your facilitator throughout the entire course. On this occasion, we will have 3 speakers. First, Yuko Kurauchi will offer the presentation titled Community-Based Resilience Analysis, CoBRA, in which she will explain that CoBRA is one of the assessment tools that helps identify the locally specific factors contributing to the resilience of communities and households that face different types of shocks and stresses. The presentation will provide an overview of the tool and the key results and findings of CoBRA exercises in Malawi and other countries. Our second speaker, Ben Tuino-Mugisha, will offer the presentation titled Application of CoBRA Results in Districts, Prioritizing Opportunities for Vulnerable Communities in Malawi, in which he will address how the UNDP works with the Government of Malawi to map pathways to build resilient communities and minimize disruptions from climate disasters by using the CoBRA methodology. He will also describe how more than 30 characteristics of resilience have been identified as resilience building blocks. The project aims to establish and then demonstrate the institutional framework required to mainstream resilience and adaptation into development planning at national and local levels. Finally, Andres Pezoka will offer the presentation titled Malawi's National Resilience Strategy, Upscaling Action to Reduce Shocks and Strengthen Household Resilience, in which he will explain how Malawi has embarked on an ambitious agenda to transition towards new ways of working that bridge the humanitarian development divide and sustain progress on household resilience. The presentation outlines Malawi's first ever national resilience strategy for 2018 and until 2030, an ambitious agenda for more resilient people, economy, and environment. Yuko Kurauchi is policy specialist at the Nairobi-based UNDP Global Policy Center on Resilient Ecosystems and Desertification, DC-RED. Yuko is responsible for undertaking applied research and developing policy tools and knowledge products on sustainable and resilient livelihoods in drylands and other fragile ecosystems. She has worked in the fields of environmental management, climate resilience building, and disaster drought risk management with various organizations. Ben Tuino-Mugisha is Program Analyst for Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction in Resilience and Sustainable Growth portfolio of UNDP Malawi. Since 2004, he specializes on community-based adaptation, resilience, with experience in vulnerability and risk assessments, design of adaptation and resilience programs, research, monitoring, and evaluation of national and rural projects. Andres Pezoka is Portfolio Manager for Resilience and Sustainable Growth for the UNDP in Malawi. He focuses on the political, socioeconomic, and ecological factors that drive pro-poor change for more resilient communities and societies. His experience includes disaster risk management, renewable energy, climate finance and adaptation, and social entrepreneurship. Welcome, Yuko, Ben, and Andrew, and thank you for accepting this invitation. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Hello, Yuko?
Yes. Yes, so I'll start now.
We're happy to have you here. Before we begin, I would like to remind all of you of some rules and dynamics in the NBSAP Forum webinar sessions. Microphones will be muted during the presentations. This reduces interferences and facilitates communication. We will have 3 presentations lasting 10 minutes each, followed by 30 minutes of questions and answers. Please send us your questions in advance or raise your hand in the control panel of GoToWebinar. If you want to speak and the connection allows it, I will open your microphones during the Q&A session. Please identify which of the 3 speakers you are addressing the questions to. This session is being recorded and will be available on the NBSAP Forum website, www.nbsapforum.net. All participants will receive an email with a link to watch it on our YouTube channel, as well as a PDF copy of the presentations and a list of resources related to the topic. Now I will transfer the webinar to Yuko. We hope you enjoy this session.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this webinar. I'm very excited to participate in this session. I listened to the last 3 webinars, and then I believe this is very unique in the sense that it shows not only the study, but also how the study result has been implemented at the local level and then at the policy level. So I hope you enjoy this presentation. Just to firstly explain what CoBRA is and then how it was developed. This tool was created in around 2011-2012 when Horn of Africa region was facing severe drought. And then it was around the time when many organizations started focusing on the concept of resilience and integrating it in their activities. But the challenge emerging with this very positive move was that the term could be defined and interpreted in numerous different ways, and thus any work might be considered as resilience-building interventions. And there were sometimes these discussions on resilience planning, resilience discussions were highly technical, academic, or even political. And affected communities had often having difficulty in taking into that discussion, even if they are actually practicing resilience on a daily basis. And therefore, CoBRA was developed with the hope to better bring the views and perspectives of affected communities into this resilience discussion and planning. Although there are so many different assessment tools are available now to look at the resilience, CoBRA is a qualitative assessment tool, and it aims to help communities to identify locally specific factors contributing to their resilience by allowing them to look back their positive past experiences overcoming and then bouncing back from shocks and stresses in reality. In almost all communities, there are households who have coped better with shocks and stresses than others. For example, some households were able to maintain their basic livelihood without external support, or restoring their livelihood faster than others. So CoBRA tried to identify these households and then try to find out how they are different from other households, and then if there are any special approaches or strategies adopted by them. And then from structured discussion with community representatives, CoBRA also aims to identify what type of support services or interventions are most needed to assist in building local resilience and then making future resilience intervention more relevant to target communities. So this slide shows how general phase and steps are taken to implement CoBRA. Just like other assessment methodologies, the process starts with preparatory phase, which is followed by the actual field data collection. Then gathered data will be aggregated and it's disaggregated and then analyzed thoroughly. And then the final phase is to disseminate the validated results and integrated them into policy and program processes at different levels. It is important to note that for CoBRA in principle, it is not undertaken by UNDP per se. We always engage local government or other UN agencies or NGO or CSO officers and then train them to collect data directly. And then these are the people who understand local context and then speak local languages, or even work directly or indirectly with target community people on a daily basis. And then by engaging them from the beginning to the end, the process will be fully owned by decision makers and practitioners, as well as the communities on the ground. So the UNDP's role is to provide desk and field-based training to these officers, and then also provide logistical and technical support during the actual data collection period. Just to explain further the data collection phase, CoBRA starts with focus group discussion with the representatives of sample communities. And in order to bring out frank and honest opinions of the communities, groups are usually divided into men, women, and youth. And then through FGD, communities first display resilience in locally relevant and an understandable language. Resilience could be always like technical and an academic, and then not used in the daily life by the communities. So it's very important to translate that into the locally understandable manner. And then they're typically described as something like stability, like being able to meet basic needs in both normal and hazard periods, such as feeding family adequately, or keeping them healthy, and sending children to school regardless of drought, flood, or other disasters. Then after definition, participants are asked to come up with necessary factors, or so-called building blocks, to accomplish such resilient status. And then they have to come up with these building blocks based on their past experiences and knowledge. And then for bringing out those factors, we use different tools such as graphic cards and then beans for scoring purposes. And after identifying those building blocks of resilience, the next step is to identify households in their own community who have attained most, if not all, of these priority resilience building blocks. So these people are called nominated resilient households. And then participants also jointly come up with the actual past interventions which best contributed to attain resilience building blocks. And after completing these 5 steps of FDG, field team organized interviews with so-called nominated resilient household, and then we organized the interview and then ask about their socioeconomic features and then other various actions or strategies that they have taken to obtain that resilient status. And then these are considered as living example of good practices. So this is, in a nutshell, the basic steps taken for the data collection. And then this slide shows the locations where CoBRA exercises were supported directly by us and implemented to date. And then please note that this doesn't include the cases where those data collection officers who are trained by us, then they become the trainer themselves and organize their own CoBRA methodologies. So it is only the ones which are organized by us. So if we include those subsequent CoBRA exercises led by others, it could be more. And in the next slide, I would like to share some of the findings brought out from these listed exercises. And then, but please note that these findings are only from rural agro-based communities in Eastern and Southern African regions, as you see in the map. And then they may not necessarily represent or reflect the reality of other areas or regions. So one of the key findings which was brought out from the past CoBRA is that views on resilience building blocks highly vary, not only among different locations or different countries, but also among men, women, and youth within the same location. As illustrated on the table, the perceptions on the building blocks shift partly since communities are in different socioeconomic conditions and then at different development stages, such as under conflict situation or chronic food insecurity or water shortage. However, even people in the same location and then facing the same shock or stress look at different driver to overcome and recover from these challenges. And those are highlighted in red font. And then these decisions on priority building blocks of resilience are largely influenced by local gender and age-based rules and interests. And then these results show the importance of resilience thinking and planning to be mindful of context specificity, and also those decisions to be sensitive to gender or age-related aspirations. When compiling the feedback from nominated resilient households, it became very evident that they maintain their stability against shocks and stresses using their income and physical asset resources flexibly. Almost all households in the CoBRA, the exercise area, have multiple income sources, for example, rather than depending on single source of income. And they mostly combine both on-farm and off-farm activities. And then during normal or non-crisis period, their natural and physical assets are often used to start up and expand their existing income-generating activities. And then saving may be also invested to increase their assets, physical assets, using for house or means of transport such as bicycles or even motorbikes, or adding more livestock, and so on and so forth. And then during crisis period, such as drought and flood, part of assets and the income base is utilized to maintain stable access to food and then cover the cost of other primary necessities, such as keeping kids to school, and so on and so forth. And then as such, resilient households commonly recommend interventions and then services which help enhance their productive assets and then generate income, like skills and opportunities for business, and then better farming exercise. General community members who participate in focus group discussion tend to request for interventions which directly contribute to resilience building blocks, such as giving food aid or a cash transfer, which contribute to food fulfillment, or asking for school facility, better school facilities, or giving scholarship, which will contribute to education. In other cases, they'll ask for more hard size or livestock restocking, which will contribute to livestock, the resilience building block. However, most resilient households request for interventions such as more access to formal and informal loan, credit, saving groups, or support in business skill development or job opportunity creation, or extension service on different cropping or livestock farming exercises. And then they say this support will automatically lead to better income and then higher or stronger asset bases, and then which in turn make them allow them to attain resilience building blocks automatically by having money and then their asset. They can automatically have access to food, education, water, or peace without support, direct support to those. And then of course, it is not feasible in most cases to shift our interventions completely as the resilient household request, since many community members are still highly vulnerable with limited or little knowledge and skills about income generation or asset creation, or they're in a very fragile or volatile situations, and then their income and asset base is not very strong. And then this slide maps out a summary of main steps taken by about 200 resilient households in Malawi to better cope with their drought and flood crisis. And then as you see on the left side, many households started their resilience pathway through food aid and cash transfer, and then slowly built it up towards the right side, and then using those resources to start a new farming, or starting a new business, or sending kids to school, and then moving towards more adaptive side and transformative side. And then therefore, what is important is not to shift directly from absorptive capacity building intervention to adaptive or transformative capacity building interventions. What is important is harmonize this short-term life-saving safety net support and then more mid-term and long-term development-oriented support in a manner to help the affected community members to move from the left side to right side. And then for that, we have to really look at different findings of CoBRA and then combine different on-the-ground program work and higher level policy support. And then my subsequent the presenter, Ben, and then Andrew, will explain how it was actually, like, CoBRA result was integrated or translated into these program support and policy support. So this is the end of my presentation. And then for those who are interested in CoBRA methodology further, please look at the CoBRA implementation guidelines, which is available on UNDP publications page. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Yuko. This was a very interesting presentation. And now I will transfer the webinar to Ben. Hello, Ben. Are you there?
Yeah.
Hi, Ben. We're ready for you.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Yes, are you getting me? Are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you perfect. Can you hear us, Ben?
Okay, thank you very much. My presentation is building on. Yes, I'm hearing you clearly. Thank you. My presentation is building on Yuko's presentation of the methodology of CoBRA. So, building on data collection methodology Yuko has explained, we've been trying to build and to transfer people to adaptive capacity. So my presentation is mainly the practical CoBRA. So I just want Malawi is one of the highly vulnerable country, the impacts of climate change, the major issues. If there's no dry spell, there will also be a flash, and this happens every year. Have an agriculture is in there, and people depend on it. So we have to find pathways to resilience. UNDP is working with the Government of Malawi, piloting in 5 districts. We are supporting resilience adaptation through decentralization process because we are of the view that any resilience work must be shaped by good policies. So that's why we are trying to pilot at local level on what can work for the people. You can go to the next slide. So CoBRA, as you have explained, was actually conducted to help us identify the resilience building blocks and plan in accordance to what works for the people. So we wanted to have evidence-based planning. We wanted to ensure that our plans, our response to the climate change vulnerabilities is informed by people's views, by what affects people, and wanted the people to self-define their own means of this. So we're able to ensure that we capture gender-specific issues.
I'm sorry, Ben.
As you has framed during the CoBRA.
I'm sorry, Ben. Forgive me for interrupting you, but we're having serious issues hearing you. Your voice is breaking up. Is there any way we can fix that? Kandula asks if CoBRA is the tool for post-assessment once a project or program on resilience development has been implemented. And then what is the time period between step 3 and step 4 of FGD?
Thank you very much for the question. Or should I take others or just one?
No, just go ahead with that one.
Sure. The CoBRA, and let me open the phase and steps. The whole phases of CoBRA usually takes a few months, but the training of the data collection team and then data collection exercise, which is step 3 and 4, these happens back to back. And then usually, as long as the focus group discussion and then key informant interview, the number is about 30 to 40, the entire exercise would be completed within a week or so. And then therefore, the focus group discussion will be undertaken in a day. Actually, like a one discussion and then a key informant interview will be done in a matter of a few hours. So that was the part of the answer. And in terms of the timing of the CoBRA implementation, yes, it can be implemented at any stage. And then the idea is to engage not only one organization, but also other actors supporting the target communities or locations all together. So that the learning process would be like a more living process. It's not like, for a specific project. And then for the community members are practicing their resilience no matter what on a daily basis, regardless of the interventions or not interventions. Maybe if the specific intervention is considered really helping or really helpful, that may be mentioned a lot during the group discussions or key informant interviews. If not, maybe it will never be mentioned. So we will get honest opinions from communities, but we try not to pinpoint specific project, but look at the issue of the resilience much more broader way, so that policymakers, practitioners, humanitarian actors, development-oriented actors, they can come together and then look at the issue of community resilience from different perspectives, but based on the community opinions. So that's an idea. And then therefore the CoBRA can be implemented at any time, well, as long as the community is accessible. If it is heavily conflict situation or during the middle of the disaster, like drought and then the flood, when the communities are too busy with their own life-saving activities, maybe they're not available for communication, but otherwise it can be implemented anytime.
Thank you, Yuko. We have somebody raising their hand to ask a question. Her name is Diana Tapia. Hello, Diana or Diana?
Diana, but you
Diana.
can Diana or yes. No problem with that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, I am really glad for being here in the webinar and with our speaker. Well, my question is the next. Here in Peru, in Latin America, obviously, we have the next problem in the jungle. We have the migratory agriculture. What is that? Is that migratory agriculture is that which destroys the jungle, I mean the forest, in order to sow foreign crops. I mean, for example, well, I forget totally how to say maize, that word in Spanish, in English. And I don't know if you remember Marcela, please. Well, I don't know, many plants like that, many food plants that don't belong to the jungle, I mean to the Amazonian part. So is it possible to apply your method, the CoBRA application, to this problem?
Yes, now I answer the question, and then the answer is, in principle, yes. The CoBRA is the methodology to assess the resilience of communities to different shocks and stresses. So far, in reality, we implemented all the exercises were implemented in Eastern and Southern Africa regions, where people are like experiencing more short-term shocks and stresses, such as diseases, more like the human diseases, drought, flood, and so on and so forth. And then therefore, we haven't looked really at the long-term stress, the resilience to those long-term stress. However, the process is like quite generic, and then therefore, it is applicable to the situation of looking at the resilience of community to these long-term like challenges, such as these non-indigenous species, and then how they're affecting their livelihood.
Thank you so much, Yuko. We have another question from Norjung Shah. This participant asks, I'm also doing research in ethnographic and trying to see the findings from resilience approach. However, the technique of data collection is the same in CoBRA and other methods. So how can we use these tools in academic study? Is the question clear for you, or?
Sure, yes, and thank you very much for like the good question. And then I actually also like listened to the previous the webinars, and then I saw many similarities, and then it's very understandable because CoBRA was actually created or generated based on the study of existing methodologies. And then I personally believe that there are many tools and the methodologies available here today to assess different aspects of resilience. And the question is which methodology to use for what purposes. Some are looking at the resilience from very quantitative perspective, looking at the statistical data which is available, or they are like the approach to only look at the secondary data, and then that is very desk-based. And then CoBRA is going to the community and then talking to people. And then some say it is very similar to the vulnerability assessment. And then there are similarities because we looked at it also. And then therefore, I believe that the most important thing is creating the assessment tool which fits the most of the need of the affected communities or the system that the people are looking at. And then whatever is applicable from CoBRA to other approach can be adapted, and then vice versa. For example, CoBRA can be further adjusted in a manner to fit the purposes of the specific context that people are working on. So we developed this approach to make sure that we can compare the results in different regions or locations. However, this is not the only methodology. We promote it within the UNDP or share the experiences with others, but it doesn't mean that this is the only one and it should be utilized everywhere. So that could be my feedback to that.
Excellent, thank you so much. We have somebody else raising their hands, Daniel Catebalila. I hope I pronounced it correctly. I will open your microphone right now. Hello, Daniel? Hello?
Hello, Marcelo.
Hi.
Hi,
Yes.
can you hear?
Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I was just looking at the presentation that you provided. I thank her for the good presentation, but I have some revelation on this CoBRA. It seems CoBRA, I have a little bit experience in climate vulnerability and capacity assessment, that it's always look like also the steps resemble with the CoBRAs, looking at the view of and perspective of the community and the household, but also looking at the local specific issues, perspective of shocks. So I'm just thinking about, is there any similarities, or the CVCA, I mean the climate vulnerability capacity assessment with the CoBRA, are they tools that resemble or can be used interchangeably? I'm just looking at that things. Is it fair, or is it good to have the tool or the methodology being used at once, or one can represent another one?
Thank you very much for the question, which is very critical. And then yes, the answer is very similar to what I said to the previous the audience, but it really depends on which methodology works best for the community. And then I think all the methodologies we have, the assessment tools we have, whatever named it is, the idea is to make the difference at the community, because we are going there to support the communities because there is some problems and then we have to fix it. And then the CoBRA approach was developed with the aim to bring out what worked, and then through the communication with the community representatives and then so-called nominated resilient households. And then therefore, we focused on those with the past issue that those areas were not focused on enough. When we looked at the issues on drought in Horn of Africa, for example, that's where the CoBRA was originally developed. There are many the vulnerability studies, climate the variability assessment also undertaken, and then those results were integrated and then translated into the implementation. However, there are still repetitive droughts and same community are affected. So we thought of something like different to do. And then that's how we came to this, and then try to focus more on what worked in the past. Even if the small steps taken and then small number of households within a huge community coped better, that experience matters a lot, and that can be replicated for the rest of the community. So we try to bring out those positive sides more. And that's how we try to differentiate between the resilience and then vulnerability within our assessment tool. So like when you look at the resilience in the CoBRA implementation guideline, I hope there are some more aspects of differences to be kind of identified. Though the currently, or like in the recent days, many of the assessment tools are like further developed, and then they have many similarities, so it's not very clear. But I wanted to just highlight that the CoBRA try to focus on more on what worked rather than what is missing or where the vulnerabilities are within the community.
Thank you, Yuko. That's fantastic. We have some other questions here. People want to know what other areas have the CoBRA program been applied in, and one participant particularly wants to know if it has been applied in Somalia.
The answer is no, not in Somalia. There was discussion at one point to organize it, but the accessibility was a big issue for all the data collectors to go there. So we haven't done. However, we undertook CoBRA in some of the conflict areas with the support of the escort services by the local government. So in principle, it's possible to do. However, sometimes the local situation doesn't allow. It doesn't mean that the entire Somalia is difficult to the approach or access to. And then it's possible to undertake in some of the areas. However, so far, no assessment has been done in Somalia to date.
Perfect, thank you. We have another question from Dagmar Walter. He asks, I wonder if you have experience with developing cooperatives as a means to build resilient household communities. Is that part of what a CoBRA program would cover, for example?
Like in terms of the data collection, there are cases where, well, like a so-called private sector or the community, like corporate groups, to participate as part of the data collector. But in terms of the implementation, yes, maybe Ben and then Andrew can explain more. But the most of the CoBRA results recommend higher focus or like stronger focus on support towards business development, so that the affected community can build up their income sources. And then therefore, through the implementation phases in those CoBRA assessment areas, their follow-up work with the community enterprises or small scale private the sector workers towards the implementation side.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Yuko. I have some good news for everyone. It seems that Ben and Andrew were able to work out their technological problems. And so we're going to test again if we can have Ben's presentation delivered. Thank you so much, Yuko. We'll get back to you after their presentations just in case there are more questions, okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. So we should be seeing Ben and Andrew's screen very soon. Hello, Ben. Hello, Ben. We need you to open your microphone so that you can speak. Ben and Andrew. Okay. Let's see. Hello, Ben. Oh, hi. Oh.
You have to run it from Ben's laptop.
Okay, is Ben there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, Ben, can you start your presentation from the beginning? You need to open your mic.
The mic is on his laptop is showing that you're still muting him.
No, we're not muting anybody. We're hearing you now, so Loud and clear. So please, if you can, Ben, if you can start your presentation from the beginning, that would be great, because we could barely hear you before, and we want our participants to be able to benefit from your entire presentation.
Okay. So you can hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. So my presentation builds on the methodology that has been presented by UPO on CoBRA, community-based resilience analysis. So I'm partly explaining how we are practically putting CoBRA results into practice. And then I wanted to highlight what makes us actually invest in CoBRA, because we are in this country, Malawi, which is one of the most vulnerable countries, climate change impacts. I had mentioned that at least every year there will be a climatic hazard. It is either a dry spell, of course, largely agriculture drought, because of so many people depending on agriculture, and that is depending on nature. Sometimes there is a flash flood, which can also affect people's livelihoods in agriculture. So actually, like in the season of 2015, 2016, almost half of the population was not able to get enough food. And also, looking at the country, the economic indicators of the country, this is one of the poorest countries in the world. And of course, we know poverty increases vulnerability shocks, climate shocks. So UNDP works with the government of Malawi to pilot the best way to address climate-related vulnerabilities. So we are piloting in 5 districts. I can mention them. We are working in Machinga district, Mangochi, Nkata Bay, Ncheu, and Zomba. So we've done CoBRA assessments in all 5 districts I've mentioned. So Yuko has mentioned the objectives of carrying out CoBRA. I would not dwell so much on that, but we did CoBRA to ensure that we represent people's views, because in this era of leaving no one behind, it is important that we bring people's views up front. It's people's views which can build the policies. It's people's views which we can respond to. So we wanted to talk to people, listen to them, and give them a chance to self-define how they feel, how the climate change impacts actually affecting them, and how they would propose to solve the problems. So people we are given a chance, actually, a platform to self-define what resilience means to them, and learning from the past, what works for them in the future. So part of this process, we had done some other vulnerability assessments where it was clearly indicated that there is low capacity to adapt to climate change impacts from policy level to community level practice. So part of CoBRA included training district officers to learn how to integrate the CoBRA results into planning processes. So you has already shown the process we use to collect data. The picture you see now, it's a picture of women pondering on what can work for them. We give people a chance to list what they think can be possible, because we are learning that what works for people is what they can themselves manage within their means. So we just incentivize what people know can work for themselves. Okay, so now I think we can go to another picture. So I said that CoBRA has helped us to identify over 30 resilience building blocks. If you look at this graph, you see priorities. Here, a priority was on productive farms and agriculture. As I've mentioned, the country depends on agriculture. So people, they are not just looking at now production. They want also markets. Other priorities high on agenda is irrigation because of dry spell. That one tells us the real problem is drought, which happens every year. So people would want to be supported, produce food, but also they told us it's beyond food, it's not about food anymore, because climate change can hit agriculture production badly, that we don't survive. So they would also need non-agriculture sources of livelihood. People are looking at how do we survive even when the drought has hit agriculture. So that's why irrigation is ranked high and agriculture. But also, some districts are talking about livestock, because mostly few households have other sources of income. It's agriculture, depending especially on one crop, that is maize. So I'm not going to explain everything here, but you can see people's priorities. So we can go to the next slide. So now, having ranked people's priorities, of course, I've already mentioned that we found about 30 plus resilience building blocks. We decided to put these priorities in action plans. So we've been able to build some resilience strategies. We've been able to put up actually 6 action plans for each district. So these are 5 districts. We are working now with the districts to integrate the action plans into planning processes. But we also feel like anything to work, to be sustainable, there should be a proper planning process from the local government building up to the national level. So we are building these plans to integrate them into local planning and giving lessons at the national level. People have told us that we should be able to support them, not to produce food only, but to build value chain in production and marketing. So we are supporting the priorities mentioned by communities. So one of the examples, as I've mentioned, priorities we have on irrigation, on food production, and marketing. We've been able to support, for example, this picture you see, irrigation schemes. Now people can be able to produce food all seasons, even during the drought spell, people can be able to produce food. Actually, this picture was taken during a dry period. So now I wanted to summarize how we're applying CoBRA. We are looking at transformation in 3 domains. We want to build capacity for the districts to continue planning according to people's needs. Then there's an issue of governance, where we are saying that policies should be participatory. It is the policies that shape adaptation, and also we want to diversify food security and livelihoods. So we are supporting marketing and production, and we also want to build community structures. We are supporting institutionalization of community associations. Then we hope that once there's capacity for districts to understand and the governance system is good and livelihood practices are diversified, resilience will have been built. So after doing all this, we want to document the best practices and share lessons to the national planning. So that's how we apply CoBRA. So there are challenges and opportunities. In this country, the centralization process, which can give people space to speak, is not complete. We hope with best practices piloted by CoBRA can help support decentralization, especially supporting local planning and feeding the best practices into national planning. Because the barriers we have currently, it's policies reaching people and people giving feedback to policy processes. So this is the end of my presentation. We shall have to listen to your feedback.
Thank you so much, Ben, for such a motivating presentation. Now I will transfer the webinar to Andrew. So we're going to wait for Andrew to share his presentation on the screen. And after Andrew's presentation, we will move on to the final questions and answer session. Please remember to indicate which speaker you're addressing the questions to. Okay? Hi, Andrew, are you ready?
I am. Good afternoon, everyone, or at least good afternoon from Malawi. Our apologies for some of those technical challenges, but I think we resolved them. What I propose to do is to bring the conversation perhaps full circle in terms of how community level action that both Yuko and Ben have highlighted is feeding into national dialogue around a resilience strategy, a 12-year resilience strategy that development partners and the government have been engaged in for the last year and a half. And only recently are we seeing fruition in terms of both getting a critical mass of partners together to perhaps introduce new approaches that are informed by bridging the humanitarian development divide, and very much recognizing the points both were underscored by my two colleagues about chronic vulnerability to shocks. And on top of that, chronic environmental degradation that you see in Malawi makes resilience planning all the more necessary. So what I'm proposing to do is to share some of the drivers of change that have informed the dialogue between development partners and the government. We need to move away from recurrent humanitarian appeals. And this is obviously a transition that you've seen across Africa and in other regions of the world. Certainly it's building on the experience that some of the listeners may be familiar with in Ethiopia around the Productive Safety Net program, around the Ending Drought Emergency program in Kenya, similar programs on resilience in Tanzania and Niger. The government of Malawi in early 2016, late 2015, engaged with development partners and also with heads of mission. And I need to underscore this was a coalition of a high ambition coalition of partners who recognized that recurring dry spells that Ben and Yuko mentioned really meant that Malawi could be characterized as a country that was using an emergency instrument, which is humanitarian assistance, to deal with what is effectively a chronic challenge of vulnerability to shocks. And these are both slow onset and rapid shocks. So as Ben mentioned, both droughts and rapid onset flooding. But at the same time, it was also recognized that there's a lot of investment that was taking place, and the government was beginning to question the productivity and the opportunity costs of having a large humanitarian caseload year in, year out, and what that was doing to, as the government characterized, as more productive investment. So what I'm proposing to talk about are some of the drivers that precipitated this conversation, but also to give an overview of the National Resilience Strategy. And let me confess, this is the first time the strategy has ever been presented to any audience outside Malawi. The strategy is nearing completion actually next month. The conversation revolved mainly around, to date, how can we assemble development partners, recognizing that Malawi is fairly aid dependent, to work in ways that are multi-sectoral, to identify very much as has happened with the CoBRA assessments, kind of interventions that are a package of complementary interventions that can be targeted to specific households, both in terms of the timing, the scale of those interventions, how they overlay with productive investments around irrigation that Ben spoke to, but at the same time recognize that communities themselves know what it means to be resilient. And the CoBRA assessment really brought that out, and that conversation has now fed into the development of the resilience strategy for Malawi. So this graph, which is actually the first time that it's actually been mapped out in terms of the humanitarian responses in Malawi over a 16-year period. Now, that in itself speaks to the governance challenges that we've confronted in terms of just access to data and the metrics around resilience planning. And what this shows in the red is effectively the humanitarian caseload. Last year, it affected 40% of Malawi's population of 17 million people. The humanitarian response, I believe, was actually budgeted at 395 million, and the government was able effectively to mobilize 286 million roughly. So it's not to suggest that those funds are substitutable. If they hadn't been spent on a humanitarian response, they would have been spent on development. That obviously doesn't hold. Those funds were actually crowded into Malawi because of the chronic and acute need that was felt during the drought season. But what you can see in the red bands are the 3-year averages where the caseload is effectively up until 2007 increased. But what's striking is the period between 2007 and 2011, where the actual number of food insecure people as a proxy for vulnerability and lack of resilience was actually quite low, but the actual volume of humanitarian assistance remained relatively constant over that period, which meant you can infer many things in conversations with government. I think what was inferred there is an increased reliance on food assistance to meet what was perhaps structural productivity constraints, but yet people were still not chronically or acutely food insecure because 86% of Malawi's population are subsistence farmers, and very few of those farmers actually sell to market. Not that they don't want to, but I think as the CoBRA assessments highlights that Yuko and Ben underscored, it's that there seems to be a low-level equilibrium in rural areas that are barriers to household subsistence farmers selling surplus to markets. What we also uncovered was the frequency of these shocks are made all the more difficult in the context of severe environmental degradation. So we know that climate change is impacting already Southern Africa and other regions of Africa, but certainly what makes them more egregious in the Malawian context is that they're multiplying the threats of pre-existing environmental degradation through deforestation. UNDP just did another study updating the 2003 statistics on the level of soil erosion. So it's now at 29 metric tons per hectare per year of soil erosion. You can physically see as you're flying into Malawi the level of deforestation. It's one of the highest in Africa and continues to be very high. When you look at access to energy, that's one of the driving factors. 0.09% of rural households have access to electricity. So certainly there's a large push now to address the structural energy gaps, but it is driving an over-reliance on biomass. And with a population growth rate, that effectively means that Malawi is growing at 1 million people per year. So its current population of 17 million will be 30 million by the time the SDGs are to be achieved in 2030. Really underscore the scale or the magnitude of the challenge that Malawi has. So climate change is making its development investments all the more expensive. And recent climate modeling, we've actually captured data from 1933. That's been, as probably many of our listeners can picture in their minds, that data was written on paper, sitting in corner of people's offices, and even the climate modeling of Malawi has been very much dependent on external data, not based on actual on-the-ground metrics. So UNDP with the government is actually now digitizing all that weather data to inform climate modeling and to have it more granularity in terms of what we're seeing at district level. The challenge that we have before us, and that the National Resilience Strategy is aiming to address, is this churning around the poverty line. So the quintiles, the differences in poverty levels in Malawi are not very pronounced, which makes targeting a challenge, and I'll get to that in a moment later on, in terms of the mix of community-based targeting and other measures. But what we see is that there's a lot of people who, the term graduation pathways, graduate out of poverty, which means effectively graduating towards higher, up the ladder of resilience. And what you'll see is there's quite a bit of sliding back, and they slide back, and it just speaks to the low level of risk exposure that these households have. Once they do raise above a certain income level, even the most minor of shocks, whether it's fall armyworm or a localized flood, can have a devastating impact on these households, sliding back both into food insecurity and into chronic vulnerability. But the government is very much keen on looking at how it can provide opportunities to lift these households towards resilience. And the schema that's on the screen, I think a lot of listeners will probably recognize this in terms of certain thresholds or inflection points where you can actually sustain progress on resilience building through long-term, well-targeted, complementary investments that are overlaid on each other, but yet targeting geographically or thematically the same households. And ultimately what we want to see, and as we see in most countries, is a ladder, or a livelihood ladder, where people can take on increasingly diversified livelihoods. I think that was underscored in Ben's comments around households wanting to have access to inputs that allow them to grow a surplus and participate in the markets, but also that demands a whole host of activities in terms of access to credit, access to market data, not being necessarily at the behest of traders. We also need to recognize the average land holding in Malawi, given its population, is less than half a hectare. Malawi is also unique in Africa in the sense that its rainy period is 4 to 5 months, and actually climate vulnerability or volatility rather is affecting that. So the long dry periods of the year mean many things. Water scarcity, so there's very little livestock in Malawi compared to other African countries. It also means you can't even do organic composting in many cases because you simply don't have enough moisture in the ground to make that a viable proposition. So the government is looking at issues around household water harvesting, irrigation, and other measures. And the resilience plan is very much about bringing all these interventions, which quite frankly are quite fragmented, both on the government side, but also quite frankly on the development partner side, to bring these working in a way more synergistically that we can make a measurable impact on people's resilience. So the resilience strategy that Malawi has set forth for itself is mainly axed around 4 pillars, revolves around 4 pillars. And not surprisingly, the first one is around the growth agenda, agriculture growth, because that sector is so important to Malawi's economy. And they currently have a number of investments around sustainable irrigation, ag diversification, the role of strategic grain reserve, and a farm fertilizer input subsidy program that was started many years ago that provides seed and fertilizer to the poorest households. Now, the challenge has been this hasn't been complemented by targeted investments in flood prevention under Pillar 2. We haven't seen the level of disaster preparedness response systems and early warning systems informing shock responsive kind of social protection systems, which is pillar number 3. So for instance, if you wanted to develop predictive kind of triggers that you can have a scalable safety net, either vertical or horizontal expansion of cash transfers or public works schemes, Malawi's hydromet system has been underinvested over many years. So to even get weather-based triggers that can inform an early kind of action on ramping up transfers has been a challenge. But these investments are currently now being made. At the same time, the government needs to and recognizes it needs to focus on integrated watershed management. The level of watershed degradation in Malawi is extreme, and it's really around harnessing both technical and financial support around hotspot watersheds to look both at their protective element, but also their productive element in terms of providing energy to rural households. As any resilience strategy, there's institutional challenges. In Malawi, it's always best to understand, as in any country, the political economy that's shaping incentives to change. Malawi's resilience agenda is being driven somewhat by disaster management affairs, the department that sits under the vice president. There's an ongoing debate whether that department is ideally suited to bring all the pieces together, whether it has the convening power to bring sector ministries like ag and water development and forestry at the table. So this implementation arrangement that you see here is very much reflective of what the government wants to see. But to be quite frank, I think the development partner confidence in this arrangement is still an evolving discussion right up with the vice president about how do you actually make these pieces work. And part of that discussion is if you really want to address resilience programming in a coherent way with multi-year programming, can you rely on multi-sector and interministerial and even intra-ministerial coordination? Or do you actually want to put the whole resilience agenda under almost like a super ministry or a super agency that reports directly to the president or vice president and is able to have enough institutional heft to bring all the players to the table? So really, development of the Malawi's resilience strategies is about building up relationships and making sure that people are aware of what different programming is going on in the country. And quite frankly, I've been surprised since my arrival a year ago in UNDP that in many ways I think our intelligence on what various ministries are doing in terms of investment in resilience, I hazard to say it's probably a bit stronger than the government's own knowledge, because the ministries simply do not sit at the table often enough to understand what each others are doing. Ben touched on governance and the importance of governance. Very much delivering a coherent package on resilience is around getting the governance systems right. We're not quite there yet, but we're very hopeful that the way the discussion's going so far, that the government's quite serious about making changes to its governance system. Currently, a lot of programming still around resilience is focused in central ministries that are in the capital, in the long way. There's been very little investment on the decentralization agenda, or at least it's been halted for the last few years. This is something that the UN writ large, not just UNDP, is looking at. How can we strengthen decentralization in a more meaningful way that it actually builds targeted resilience investments at district level? And so our narrative has been very much around shared benefits to departments and understanding what incentives are currently driving them. And again, having very frequent discussions among the development partners about how best to approach this. And my last point is around tactical patience and helpful nudges. In many cases, what we've tried to do is bring not only resilience mapping of the type like CoBRA has done, but also to bring other investments to bear on resilience programming in Malawi. And let me speak to those next. So in terms of the complementary interventions, where the resilience strategy is currently now doing the inventory of all the interventions that are ongoing in the district level, right down to targeting of households. And maybe I'll move to the third point about metrics for household resilience. You know, there's often a discussion about how just expensive it is to do mapping exercises. So you look at what CoBRA has done, which has been very low cost and effective, but to scale that up across the country would be an order of magnitude beyond probably any development partner or the government. So the government now has invested $50 million in biometric national identification cards. And the discussion has now turned to how can you make those biometric cards actually leverage that investment for resilience building. So in the context of a social registry, so developing a national registry that actually has all the data around household characteristics, their vulnerability to shocks, whether they're in environmentally degraded areas, whether they're in flood hotspots, what their asset profiles are like, and use the national ID to inform the development of a social registry so you can actually have much more targeted programs. But at the same time, use it for measuring change in resilience. So if you're receiving a fertilizer input, or you're receiving a cash transfer, or food for work, or a public works scheme, that you'd actually, every recipient would use their unique biometric identifier, and we'd be able to actually have a better picture of which households are receiving which support, when, how often, and what change it's making on their resilience by looking at maybe every 4 to 5 years, integrating it into the household survey work that the National Statistic Office does. But I must confess, obviously 50 million is a large investment, but at the same time, can you use those biometric cards very similar to what we see in Kenya in terms of cash payments and making that more efficient? But it also will help us around the first point about complementary investments and just better understanding which investments are going where. Decentralized delivery, I spoke to that. Maybe I'll, because I'm running out of time, just look at the incentives for pooled finance. And this gets back to the governance issue. Some of you may be aware of some large corruption scandals that have impacted donor confidence in Malawi in the last few years. There is currently no budget support. Pooled funding itself, it does exist, but not the number of examples that you see in other African countries. So these governance issues matter in terms of how you can scale up resilience interventions in a country like Malawi, where the needs are so great. But it also, at the same time, it's been what is underscored is, do we actually have a high ambition coalition amongst the development partners and government who are willing, as we saw in Ethiopia and Kenya, to recognize that turning the tide, so to speak, on moving away from recurrent humanitarian appeals to having a solid safety net that is the foundation for resilience programming. This usually takes 3, 4, 5 years, where you develop your targeted caseload, although caseload is not a term I necessarily like, but you know that caseload is who you're targeting year in, year out, and any shocks beyond that, you're actually then using your emergency instrument. So these are discussions that are ongoing in Malawi. It's something to watch. The resilience plan strategy, rather, we over the next 3 weeks, we're actually developing an implementation plan, very practical, speaks to all the issues around metrics, around government capacity, around identifying the suite of complementary investments that are most effective in different parts of the country based on evidence. And then also looking at some of the capacity issues around secretariat to help the government administer the delivery of the resilience strategy. So within the time allotment, I hope we've brought together some of these pieces. Again, the story is still unfolding on the resilience strategy, but we're very keen to have a discussion with the participants on how this is moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for such a great presentation. This is a really interesting and relevant topic for our NBSAP forum members. I'm sure our participants found your presentations valuable for implementing their NBSAPs. I would like to invite participants to share their questions, doubts, and comments, or raise their hands to participate in the Q&A session. We have a very short time. We are already running late, but we will take 2 or 3 questions per speaker just to wrap this up as it should be. So please use the control panel of the GoToWebinar platform to submit your questions, and we can open your microphone or read your question depending on your preference. Please remember to indicate which speaker you're addressing your question to. So we already have a question for Ben. Ben, we have Jamie Williams asking if there has been any consideration of spiritual or religious assets in describing the resilience of communities. And also, we have Daniel Catebalila asking, with the application of CoBRA at the community level, is there any facilitating methodology of resilience and climate change adaptation? Can you take those questions, Ben?
Okay, so application of CoBRA, as I've told you, it's through a participatory process where we discuss with the communities, and actually whatever we put in action plan is coming from the people. So the consideration of indigenous knowledge, culture, actually we are using, I can say, knowledge, attitude, and practice kind of tool, where we identify all views of people, because we are working with Christians in some districts, and there are districts also which are dominated by Muslims. So like a project like Piggery can work in one area, but doesn't work in another area. So we are sensitive to cultural issues and religious issues. So in the methodology on climate change adaptation, CoBRA has been able to help us to identify vulnerabilities and the set of projects that we can have at community level. So we are using adaptation tools. For example, our plans consider ecosystem-based adaptation, because we have to ensure that if you are doing irrigation, there should be issues to do with gender. We should protect the ecosystem. Adaptation is part of our work, and actually our projects are helping the country to develop planned adaptation. So we use adaptation tools in resilient activities, because we know adaptation is resilience. So everything we are doing, it's responding to climate change vulnerabilities using adaptation methodology, as I've mentioned, especially the ecosystem-based adaptation, and we have also developed community-based adaptation action plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate it. We also have a couple of questions for you, Andrew. One of them is if in order to collect data, if you have used IT or smartphone technology, and for household resilience, is there any behavioral change and creating women groups for rapid onset disaster and to broadcast?
Okay, in terms of the first question, the development of the targeting is based on what Malawi calls its Unified Beneficiary Register, its UBR, which is not fully a social registry. It's missing some characteristics of that. But what that entails is going into all 28 districts and doing a survey at least 50% of the population using proxy means testing. This is done by the Ministry of Finance, and they're using iPads. They're using a mobile application for the household survey work. Some of the issue has been, what we're grappling with now is how do you bring out all that data and marry it now to a national ID, which is a unique identifier for that household. Malawi is one of the last countries, I think, in Africa that has a that is getting a national ID program, national ID card. So it sounds easy to do, but it would mean that whenever someone comes to get say a cash transfer or a food transfer, that we need to re-register the cards with the identity of that person. So there's a lot of IT infrastructure involved in that. But we can, if the person wants more details, we'd be happy to provide that. The second question around gender-specific groups around early warning and flood response. Yes, indeed, that happens. There are many civil protection committees. It's in Malawian law that these committees exist at district level. There's a number of endogenous kind of community early warning systems already in place, where they're reading very appropriate technology, river gauges, and they're using megaphones. But at the same time, the government's trying to marry that with more modern technology. So there's a large investment now underway to bring in, I believe, 80, it's almost too many. I don't think I would take that number with a grain of salt, but 84 automated weather stations, including automated river gauges that would give both daily and hourly readings. And the issue has been then the dissemination of those early warnings to communities at risk. And the government recognizes that hydromet architecture still is not completely effective, but it has set itself up some pretty ambitious targets where it's actually said publicly that we want to reduce the number of both affected households, affected people, but also mortality rates, a certain percentage each year out of 100,000 people. And it's publicly now saying it will report its performance under the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So it is happening. Certainly women's groups are part of that, but a lot of it is a mix of different NGOs supporting these groups. There's yet to be a national platform that looks at how to bring community warning systems up together to make them all more effective across the country.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We have reached our allotted time, everyone, so I'm afraid we won't be able to take any more questions. But many thanks again to Yuko, Ben, and Andrew for your time, and thank you all for your participation and enthusiasm in this webinar. I would like to ask our speakers if they can share with us some final remarks, very specific, like some key concepts or ideas that they can share with our participants today. Yuko, Ben, or Andrew, do you have anything that you want to highlight very briefly, please? Because we're running.
Yes, from my side, I will not talk anymore because it will take another 10 minutes or 30 minutes. But my contact detail is on the PowerPoint. And I hope that it will be also shared somehow with the participants. So I welcome any individual question coming to me through email or other forms. And then thank you very much for organizing this great event.
Thank you so much, Yuko.
Yeah, this is Ben. I think it's good to share my contacts because it would be good for us to learn from what others are doing. Because what we've discovered, some of the processes are new, especially on resilience work. Even someone has asked about adaptation methodology. People are working on climate change adaptation, are working on resilience work, doing it business as usual. But we want to have some kind of adjustments and innovations where someone is able to say, this is not the usual development work. So we would want to continue sharing with you. It would be good to keep in contact. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, just to be mindful of the time, I think we need to be aware that what resilience work involves is breaking out of sometimes our tribal comfort zones of the development actors, humanitarian actors, climate change actors. Quite frankly, resilience means all these people need to be working together. And it talks to the importance of metrics, and that if we're actually making these large investments in resilience, we need to be able to measure the change over time. And that demands us to recognize making the investments that will stick, so we can actually measure these changes at household level.
Perfect. I will share your contact details with our participants, and I will also send you the list of questions that were left unanswered in case you are able to answer them. And also the list of resources that you sent will be shared in our NBSAP forum. So thank you once again, and to our participants, I want to say that please check out our website, the NBSAP forum, to receive the latest news regarding this webinar and the Introduction to Resilience for Development MOOC. You will also find the PDF copy of all the presentations and a link to the recording, which will be available on our YouTube channel. Also, please remember to complete the weekly lessons, which are required for you to receive your course certificate. If you still haven't finished the lessons, I encourage you to do so as soon as possible, since they are the only requirement for you to obtain your certificate for this course. Once you have finished the lessons, you need to pass an online quiz and answer the course survey, both of which will be available next Tuesday, November 28, on the Conservation Training platform. Remember that the part 2 of this MOOC, Applying Resilience Thinking to National Biodiversity and Development Plans, will run from 23 January through 12 February 2018. We invite you to join us. So finally, the NBSAP Forum is a global partnership to support the development and implementation of effective national biodiversity strategies and action plans. It is hosted by the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations Environment Program. I'm Marcela Torres, and on behalf of the NBSAP Forum, I hope you all enjoy this session. Have a great day or evening, and I will see you in January. Bye-bye.